What's up, y'all? I'm Will here with Schedulefly, and this is the Restaurant Owners Uncorked podcast, one of the highest rated hospitality podcasts in the world, brought to you by us at Schedulefly. We provide a very simple web-based restaurant employee scheduling software backed by legendary customer service. If you're on pencil and paper or Excel, or you're on some software with tons of bells and whistles and features you don't need or use, Schedulefly is the perfect place for you. Easy to use, point, click, and go, and we'll take great care of you. Schedulefly.com, free trial, check it out. All right, y'all, check it out. Stick is our sponsor, connectwithstick.com. This is an incredible text and marketing tool. So check this out. Engage your customers, drive foot traffic, and increase sales at your bar, your restaurant, your store with Stick. Your targeted messages reach your audience instantly, promoting special offers and events. Look, 98% of texts are seen within 3 minutes. So this thing is simple and it's effective and it works. Elevate your marketing strategy and watch your customer base grow with the most direct way to connect with your customers through text. Start today and see results on the very first text. Stick is a better way to connect with your customers and the easiest way to increase your sales. www.connectwithstick.com. And again, that's www.connectwithstick.com. Folks, this is an awesome sponsor. It's an awesome business. We at Schedulefly know them well. We know that the results are there. This is a highly effective tool, and it's run by a business run by great people. Check them out, connectwithstick.com. All right, y'all. This is, personally, this is really cool. This is Mike Sebazco with Famous Toastery. It used to be called Toast, and they're local. They actually started up around Davidson, where I went to college. That's where their headquarters are. I think the first one was in Huntersville, but my mom and I went to the Toast. Then they changed the name to Famous Toastery for years, every Tuesday for breakfast pre-COVID. And then I moved and that changed. But so this is just personally really cool. And then also this is a great brand that is growing in the Southeast and has kind of gone from, just a few local stores to they had the Famous Toastery football bowl game this year. They have a NASCAR sponsorship. So if you haven't heard of Famous Toastery yet, maybe you're not in the Southeast, you will. They're growing. They've got a great brand. Anyone you go to, I guarantee you're going to have a great experience. And Mike has come in and has been there for the last few years, but has a very, very long and successful track record in hospitality. And we were lucky to have him here in studio. We had a great conversation. You're going to enjoy this. You're going to learn a lot. And you're going to really like getting to know Mike. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy this episode and stay tuned. Well, Mike, thank you for driving down today. Nice to do this with somebody here in the studio. It's probably 10% of our episodes are done in studio. The rest we, have somebody in another state or whatever they Zoom in. So these are the best conversations.
I get that.
Here in person. So do me a favor and just introduce yourself real quick.
I am Mike Sebazco. I'm the president of Famous Toastery based in Davidson, North Carolina. Nationally, we say that as Charlotte. And I've been with Famous Toastery for 2 years. And I've never been in a place this nice where I am in boots and jeans and I'm overdressed.
You are, yeah. I know. I roll pretty casual for sure. I like those boots.
Thanks.
Okay, so 2 years there. I said I don't have a format, and I don't. But the first question I always ask everybody is, how and when did you get started in this wonderful world of hospitality?
Yeah, it's a pretty easy question. My parents were those people. At 10, I asked for a bike. They got me a paper route.
Oh, okay.
So when, I'm 15, you think I'd have figured that out. I asked for a car and I got a dishwashing gig for my 15th birthday. My dad took me to a little health food restaurant in Hurst, Texas, and said, "Your car's in there. Go talk to Dorothy." And Dorothy was the manager of a place, and I'll never forget her. It was my first real job that I wasn't slinging papers or detasseling corn. And I've been washing dishes for 40 years now this month. So that's kind of the thing. Um, Since then, been in company restaurants, franchise locations, really learned a lot from really blessed with the mentors I've had in this
Mhm.
industry and some of the organizations I've been in as the organization has it as the industry has ebbed and flowed and changed and evolved, it kind of keeps coming back to the same places about executing fundamentals, and that's what restaurant ownership, restaurant execution has really been about for me in my career. So, about 20 years ago, I was in my first foray in franchising with a Canadian company, Boston Pizza.
Oh, yeah.
Fantastic organization.
Yeah.
One of the best gigs I've ever had. I can't say enough about those guys. And it was a great place to go and learn franchising. And when I was heading up the U.S. ops department, there was a guy in sales by the name of Michael Mabry,
Okay.
who, when he left the organization, he went to Tin Star and that became Mooyah, and 15 years later, we reconnected at Mooyah, ran his ops and development department there. And then he partnered up with Robert Maynard, the founder of Famous Toastery, about 3 years ago. And they see themselves as an incubator of some brands, not
Okay.
always in the restaurant space. And I was brought in to run Famous Toastery at that time, which in itself was a interesting trip.
Mike Mabry and Boston Pizza out of Canada. We've I know him or we have communicated. So we had or have a ton of Boston pizzas on Schedule Fly, which I always thought was
Yep.
wild because they're a Canadian
Yep.
company called Boston Pizza. Um,
Well, that story's awesome.
I don't know the story. I always wondered, like, I thought, well, maybe we're just getting a bunch of Canadian ones, but
Yeah.
surely they're all over the U.S. too. And it was just like it's all these Canadian franchisees.
It was, George Melville and Jim Treliving, up in Edmonton, Alberta, by a pizza place. This is a version of the story that I'm gonna stick with, and I'm not gonna change any of the names of places. But Jim and George bought a pizza place called Gus's or something really horrible like
Yeah.
that for a pizza place, and it was in the '60s, and they said, "We gotta upgrade this. We gotta make it, a little more professional sounding." And that year, the Celtics had won the NBA and the Bruins had won the NHL. And they said, man, Boston's got to have awesome pizza. And neither of those guys had ever been to Boston. So that's how I got the name out of Edmonton. And I love that origin story because, like a lot of founder led things, that's how that goes. And just two great guys to steward. That business. Some of the risks that they took that paid off for them. Some of the risks that didn't. Their heart was always in the right place, and just a cool organization.
It shows well, we're gonna get into nailing the basics and the fundamentals in a minute here, but that just shows right there that you can really miss on a I mean, they were trying to get away from a bad name, and not that Boston Pizza is a bad name, it's a great name, but Boston is not known for its pizza, so if you're taking a concept to Canada and it's, based on some US city that has great pizza, you don't
That
you
you've never
don't
been to,
lead with
right? Yeah,
Boston.
I just love it. That's the most Jim and George thing ever. Jim, at least. I mean, Jim was one of the first guys on a show called Dragon's Den,
Okay.
and he was the lead dragon up in Canada forever. And when they moved that show to the U.S., it became Shark Tank, right?
Ah,
And he was the
okay.
original guy there, and he was one of the only Canadians that didn't make that transition down, which I wish the U.S. population was exposed to Jim Treliving because he's just an intoxicating, fun guy to be around, and we're all a little nutty that do this, and Jim's nutty in the right way. Good stuff.
You know, your story is and your origin story is so similar to God. I just told somebody this yesterday who they it was the folks that started have you heard of Biscuit Belly?
Absolutely,
Okay,
yeah,
so Chad and Lauren Coulter were on here on Zoom
yeah,
yesterday and they started out in pharmacy school and
yeah.
I'm like, y'all, you're literally I know that there have been other people who don't have this story, but 95% of the people come on here tell me they started washing dishes at 14 or 15 years old, and that's what it led to.
Yep.
And so they had a very different one. Um, so you're there, you're washing dishes because you got to make money to buy a car,
Yeah,
but
and I don't recommend a '77 Ford Granada as your first purchase. Just tell you that. There's still oil all over the North Texas highways from that vehicle. But yeah, that
But you did it, you got it,
you
but
bet.
then that was a means to an end, and now it turned into an end. Where along the line did you start going, "Okay,
Yeah,
I
that's
like, there's
really interesting.
something here."
You bet. You bet. If you'd have told the 18-year-old or 20-year-old version of myself that I was going to be in the restaurant management or an ops side of things, I would have told you ESPN needed my talents entirely too much to rob the sporting world of whatever I was going to bring to the table. And I was a history major. I did some things, and I worked in several restaurants in my teens. I worked for a couple of the Brinker groups, the steak and ale groups back then, which was Bennigan's and all that stuff. And all these places had these wonderful systems and processes, but it just wasn't something that really connected to me. This is the 80s.
Mm,
I think the 80s gets the draconian management style tag an awful lot, and rightfully so. Rightfully so. But a place called Harrigan's opened up right down the street from us, and
this is in
this
Texas.
is in Texas.
Yeah.
They had 10 restaurants across the state, one in Albuquerque and one up in Oklahoma, this kind of regional thing out of Lubbock. And I went and ate there. Took a date because they were killing our happy hours down at Bennigan's. It was like we were entitled to that, right? And it's kind of the first rule of the restaurant business is he who executes best wins.
Mm,
And I could tell when I walked in the door, these guys were serious about it. Everybody had a role, everybody had a function, and people were genuinely happy to be there.
mm,
We've all walked into the restaurant where there's a 20-year-old standing behind a counter going, "This job sucks,"
mhm.
and we're looking at him like, "Yeah, that's why we gave it to you," right? There were none of those positions in this place, and I went back every day for 2 weeks to get an interview
Mhm.
with that organization as a server. I mean, I was a bartender at the other place, and they were like, "Man, we're full. We're full." Finally, at 7 o'clock on a Friday night, I hung out by the dumpster, which I don't recommend as a strategy in this day and age. But I caught the GM when he was on his way home, and I said, "Just give me a shot." And he said, "Be here for orientation tomorrow morning." And I said, "Great. What time?" He said, 6 a.m. And nobody does that.
Yeah.
Nobody, but that was part of the weeding out policy. What they had built was kind of this culture and the system where they were really serious about it. And as I got to know the guys that were and gals that were part of the system, in fact, that next morning, that orientation, I remember there was a gal working her fanny off at 6 a.m. taking a bar inventory, and she had a sweat ball dripping off her nose and was just working it really hard. And she and I had been married for 30 years now, so that
Ah,
was I met her there.
ah,
Everybody had just a role to do, but what the secret to Harrigan's was that really really good scratch made food at a really really fair price.
mhm.
And I mean, they controlled costs by just making sure they executed everything perfectly, and they took the time to train. And if there's one thing that I've seen over 40 years through all the technological advances and stuff that we've done is that nobody spends the time or money or investment in training.
Okay.
That orientation at Harrigan's lasted 4 hours to be a
Mm,
server.
gotcha.
Nobody does that. No, well, we're rolling that at Famous Toastery, but Harrigan's morphed into a concept called Don Pablo's.
Okay.
They took the Mexican items off the menu, and I was in Don Pablo's number 4 as an assistant manager. But I saw a culture where the restaurant managers I'd had in my previous lives, were all working 100 hours a week. These guys were doing 65, 70, really dedicated to it, but they had a right of self-determination.
Mm,
Like at Bennigan's in the late 80s, if you were missing your labor budget, you had every manager in the building the last night of the month washing dishes. Not saying that didn't happen at Harrigan's and Don Pablo's, because it did, but it happened based on however you had planned and executed. And that was kind of unheard of. Everybody was married to these systems. These guys let you think a little bit, but
mm,
kept you in on the riverbanks. And philosophically, they just had it right. It's about the guest. It's about the guest. It's not about making money. And if you do that, the money comes. And my dad even saw a change in me. He said, like, "Hey, it looks like they're teaching you something about business, and you're a bit of an evangelist, for this
yeah.
organization." So, uh, we grew a lot more Don Pablos than we ever did Harrigan's. Like I said, it was a number 4. We grew eventually to 170. And, when we went public, had a great story there. I was in multi-unit management at that time. It was the first 13 years of my career. Thought I was going to retire from there. And then somebody bought it. And that happens an awful lot. Somebody bought the organization. They were also a publicly traded company. We were just another brand of them. Out went the tilt skillets and the stovetops, and came the microwaves. And I probably should have left that day because
Mm,
the fundamentals of that concept were just shot at that point.
yeah.
So I thought,
Expense control.
yeah, yeah. But that's when I saw guys that were able to go to church and guys that were able to raise their families in the restaurant business. That's when I started to consider it because I had never really seen that. I just saw how taxing it was on family life and what we would call normal life. But yeah, you're going to work and you're going to work hard, and certain things will fall onto you that you just own the outcome and the result. And that Harrigan's Don Pablo's group is the first time I saw guys that were able to get to their kids' soccer games and baseball games and stuff like that. And sure, they would come in after the game and take an inventory or close or make sure the order was right. They never completely divorced themselves of it. But I saw them having lifestyles and families and things that I had never really associated with this industry.
Hmm. Yeah, that's interesting because the you said in so many words, when you focus on the things that the guest experience, the things that matter the most, the money is the byproduct of that.
Exactly.
It flows downstream from that.
Exactly.
The challenge is when you have a buyer, whoever that was that comes in, and if they own multiple brands, those types of transactions, it's all about the expense side of the balance sheet, and it's measurable stuff.
Hmm.
The microwave is cheaper than so it doesn't often, not always, but a lot of times those are numbers guys and gals that don't understand culture and experience and how the guest feels, which is this sort of like magic alchemy that if you can create it just works, but you can't like put your finger exactly on it. And then
Absolutely, man.
that becomes this, well, I can tell you this, the microwave costs this, the stove, like look how much we'll save.
Yeah.
And then all over time, that guest experience gets watered down and then the culture just destroyed. And then I don't know what happened with Tom Pablo's eventually, but it's not the place where folks that were there during the time when it was thriving and growing and then getting to the point where it could become a public company, those kind of people are not going to stay in that kind of environment.
Yeah, I'm not saying Don Pablo's Harrigan's had a monopoly on a culture that was effective within the industry. I will say that there are very different bean counters in the world.
Yeah.
In fact, our VP of Finance and Accounting at Famous Toastery is like me, an unfrozen caveman operations guy. He gets it. He gets what drives these things. So when he's looking at a balance sheet and a P&L, he understands what drives those results and what we have to get better at. So you just can't cut your way to prosperity.
Yeah.
And I think that was kind of the thing going on in the 90s and through the tech boom as we got into the early 2000s. That's what a lot of folks were trying to do, is just trim it up, right size it. I mean, and I get why. um, Commercial real estate is the one thing that hasn't corrected. Everything else is corrected. Commodities have corrected in some capacity. uh, in some capacity, labor has corrected, as even though it's escalated. But that commercial real estate piece, back then when we started in this, we were all playing an EBITDA game. Right? It was earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization, and rent, because we all owned our property. And then you get to the late 90s where everybody started doing sale leaseback programs, and that applied pressure, right? You no longer own the real estate, so you don't have appreciation there. You no longer have that asset on the balance sheet.
Hmm.
Restaurants were strong enough to be able to proceed in an EBITDA environment where it was just what are the grassroots of this business? Is it profitable? And that's pure restaurant. However, you know you can be a little late on your own rent check,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Landlords tend not to. not to allow that, not to be as forgiving.
Yeah.
So, it did apply a lot of pressure, and it's just how you look at the business. The flip side of that, as we were cutting that, the first place I think people were cutting over time was in training.
Hmm.
They were going to more packaged product to use less labor. Not that everybody fully captured any of that. And, I think anybody that's has an ops background like me will laugh and understand what I'm talking about there, because we
Yeah.
brought in all these initiatives, but we really didn't save any labor doing that kind of stuff. Um, it's just, we find ourselves in this environment and we've cut back on labor in a time, particularly since the pandemic, where in some cases wages have doubled,
Yeah.
right? But I'll tell you, it goes back to something I saw 15 years ago in a concept I was in, that in my 40 years in the industry, I've seen it twice. It happened on the same week. When I was out in California, I saw a server and a line cook retire from a restaurant that they'd been in for 25 years. They
Hmm.
retired.
They
And this is
retired.
in California, where
Yeah.
the cost of living, is crazy
Hmm.
and atrocious. But they made a good living. They were able to take care of their families. They were respected members in their communities, because I was really intrigued. I mean, as you know, restaurant careers tend not to end that way.
Right.
Somebody throws their sucker in the dirt, there's some screaming, some shouting, or just a no-show. But this is a culture that had it right, and that's what we wanted to be a part of, and that's what the Heritage Don Pablo's concept was about. I've been blessed to be with a couple other organizations like that, and that's kind of where we are at Famous Toastery now. Whether it's our company restaurants where we operate six, and we want people to have a path where they can take care of their families, they can take care of their kids, they can take care of their social lives, be members of the community, but live their life a little bit, right?
Yeah.
And that's what's gone on. Well, for a lot of years, even though we've doubled salaries and wages in some of these hourly positions, they were way behind. They were way behind, and I think that's a byproduct of what happened in the '90s when we all did these sale leasebacks. We used to own our property. Now we don't. So there's a lot of pressure on the business to carry, an EBITDA number that is a little tougher than it was when we all started this thing. In
Hmm.
my case, 40 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. So they were. Was this a concept you were at where you had two people that were able to
I was
retire?
in this particular concept. I'm not going to give them too big of a shout out because they messed it up
Okay.
after we all left
Okay.
there. But it was a legacy 50-year-old brand that
Yeah.
actually did get to national. Same thing that happened to Don Pablo's happened to them. They were bought out by another organization, changed their culture, changed the core, the ethos of the brand, and then it kind of withered up. But to have a server for 25 years, that's a pretty special thing. And just left, retired. There was
That's
a big
amazing.
cake. Yeah.
That's amazing.
We
Who
need more
is?
of that.
It's well. It's. I mean, that's not an uncommon thing. A brand has some magic that propels growth. Growth leads to an IPO or whatever, and then over time, that brand may fade away. What are some brands, you've been doing this a long time, that you either have or have not worked in, but that you admire and study because of their longevity and success?
You know, I admire not necessarily staying power. I admire quality.
Hmm.
Um, the Papa's chain of the '90s and early 2000s, I think, was probably a gold standard in casual dining, and that's what I was in because they committed to the training. I don't know that they're still as committed as they were. It's been a little tougher, but the Papa Does, Papacitas, those groups
Hmm.
there, I would once a month get into one of their restaurants and just see what they were doing, how they were executing. Is the ebbs and flows of commodities. Times got tough. They were just uncompromising, and that's something we emulated wherever I was. I was in the steakhouse business. Texas Land and Cattle, which we had a couple here in Charlotte at one point in time. I had that concept for 4 years, and um, that's what we did is we just said we're going to be a lot like that. I think Houston's has kind of a family tree
Hmm.
of guys that are executing out there based on that Houston's model. I do like that, but I really, really, really like the premise of the brand I'm in now at Famous Toastery. What Robert and Brian Burchell, the founders, were about was just really good food, when good food means simple, scratch, made
Hmm.
fresh daily, and served with hospitality. I mean, Brian knew every guest in 3 restaurants, and that's what this should be, and it takes some time to do that.
Hmm.
So, yeah, that's exactly what I admire. In that place where the people retired, I felt like that concept was the closest thing to the Harrigans and Don Pablo's experience that we had in the '90s. And the first time I went to talk to them is the week they were bought out, and they were like, "Yeah, that stuff's not important to us right now. We're leveraging this investment." And I mean, that was the end of the conversation.
Hmm. Um, you've mentioned training a couple of times. That's very important.
Mhm.
Um, Tell me a little bit more about that. And is this what do you when you say training? What does that mean?
Yeah, training is about an outcome, right? It's about something other than yourself, but it's delivering a desired result. One of the kicks we're on right now is a Maya Angelou quote: "People forget what you said, forget what you did, but they'll never forget about the way you made them feel." Right,
Right.
and that's the outcome of the training that we're after. So I'll go back to that very first day I met my wife. Later that day at Harrigan's, they wouldn't let me touch anything that was going to touch a guest because they had a concept there said permit no employee to perform any job or task until they are properly trained. The only thing I was qualified to do on day one was sign in on my timesheet. And then they took me through every menu item. Also met my best friend that day too. He was in the salad expo station,
Okay.
right? You know how guys just connect from
Yeah.
time. I was originally from Iowa. He's from Kansas. I wrestled. He wrestled. We're just kind of talking, and the general manager comes walking in the kitchen, and we're at the salad station. There's no business in the restaurant just yet, and the dude whips out a toothbrush and starts scrubbing a wire rack. And I'm like, "What are you doing?" He's like, "You didn't bring your toothbrush?" I'm like, "No." He's like, "Here, use mine." So the general manager's walking the other way, and I am scrubbing furiously on this wire rack. And the GM stops and looks at me like, "What are you doing, man?" So I'm cleaning with my toothbrush. He's like, "Don't do that." So we've
He
been best
got
friends
you.
since that
He
day.
got you.
We've been best
That's
friends since
freaking
that.
great.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, I love it.
I love Matt. It's been 40 years of that, you know,
That
with
is
that.
classic.
Yep.
I love that.
However, so as we got down to business there, that day, at the end of the day, I was qualified to make 3 of the 7 salads on the menu. No, I was not allowed to touch a baked potato, not allowed to do anything. So they had this kind of stepping stone of fundamentals.
Mhm.
And, I think the best analogy I have for that goes back to a John Wooden piece. Everybody has it's seen his triangle of success at some point in time, but the most fundamental thing John Wooden did for every year, whether you were a freshman, sophomore, upperclassman, anything. The very first practice at UCLA was how to put on socks.
Mhm.
Day one, minute one of every practice. And even if you've been through it before, there was a refresher how to put socks on your feet so that you didn't get blisters. And then they moved on to how to tie your shoes
How to tie your
properly,
shoes. I remember that part. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And these are the fundamentals that we just kind of break ourselves upon. So when you walk into a restaurant or somebody's restaurant where somebody didn't get the message, things are not happening for one of two reasons. If they aren't happening, either the frontline team member can't do it or they won't do it.
Mm.
It's pretty rare anybody woke up this morning to screw up my restaurant.
Right.
So it's typically they can't. It's because we didn't spend time to train them, and that's what Harrigan's and Don Pablo's and some of these other concepts what we're working on right now at Famous Toastery has really deciphered is how do we get them to understand the outcomes and why and what's possible and how they can inject some of their personality into it. So it's a lot of role playing. I mean, the fundamentals of training are tell, show, do, review, right? And it seems to me more and more as folks are embracing YouTube training and video training that you're missing the coaching moments. My management training program in a company restaurant for Don Pablo's was 12 weeks. The manual was like 7 pages long, just tiny. And it
Mhm.
was all concept about how do you handle situational leadership. Very, very hands on. And someone had to sign off on me before they would let me out into the world to go deliver guest experiences or be in charge of a guest experience, which was the most fundamental sacred item in the restaurant,
Mhm.
was just training, training, training. And like I said, and I know on a bit of a ramble a few minutes ago, but as the pressures fell on the P&Ls, those are the things that went away. I remember a time where everybody's training budget was 1% of sales. And I remember first year at Don Pablo's when we were bought out, it went to point 0.8 to point 0.5. And then by the time the final budgets were written, it was a 0.1%. So that's a 90% reduction
Mm.
on how you were supposed to train people.
Yeah.
And no secret that that's really where the wheels started coming off on what the guest was experiencing. And that happened pretty quickly.
Is your training done? Is it all done in house? Do you outsource any of that?
Yeah,
Okay.
no, we don't outsource anything. I got a very talented. We do. We're lucky to have Kellyanne Higgins as our VP of ops experience and training. She's just people is her jam. In fact, if she listens to this, she'll realize that I stole the Maya Angelou quote from her.
From her.
And
Yeah.
I'll tell you that other concept where I saw the people retire is where I first worked with her, and that was the first time I'd heard that quote, and that hung with me.
Do you know the Indigo Road Hospitality Group?
I've heard. I'm not.
Oak Steakhouse, Oku Sushi. They're around here. They've got like 30 plus restaurants around the southeast. But they're big into that. Like that
Yeah.
same quote. And that's true. I mean, you remember how people made you feel when you leave a place, and it is. You can miss on a few things.
Yeah.
You could miss on the food. Maybe the omelet came out not, right, but the way you handle that and the way you make that person feel and the intention and presence you bring to that situation and the validation
Yep.
that you bring is what moves mountains with people because we all just want to feel heard and validated and that we matter. And
Absolutely, man.
yeah, that's amazing. Okay. So let's talk about the story of Famous Toastery.
Yeah.
Um, I I love. I mean, I'm from around here, and
Right.
I went to college at Davidson, and I have known Famous Toastery for a while and frequented Famous
Yeah.
Toastery, but I don't know the origin story.
Yeah. It's really not unlike Jim and George. So we got Brian and Robert, two New York guys, right? And they're I think Brian's parents were the ones that first got to the Lake Norman area
Okay.
to retire. These guys grew up on the same street, Holiday Park Drive on Long Island.
Hmm.
They'd known each other since they were 5. Brian comes to visit his parents and says, I think we could do a breakfast place here. So the parents are retired here. He's a retired cop. Robert's dad is a retired New York City fireman. And in fact, his 9/11 gear is hanging in our Davidson location with a picture
That's cool.
of him on that. So, these guys are
Yeah.
good, hardworking, blue collar dudes. And Robert had a background in finance and accounting. Brian was a lifelong front of the house restaurant guy. And they brought down a chef of theirs. Julio is a franchisee for us now, from New York, and they did a house in Huntersville and just wanted to see how it goes. And they were executing and they were winning. It went really well. So the second location was that one in Davidson. They were operating under the name Toast Cafe.
Yep.
Which for anybody in the IP world out there will understand why we had to change that name. You cannot trademark toast.
Yeah.
Right. So they did that. They did Concord Mills. They had a lot of folks, not unlike you, that just really liked the concept and saw
Right.
what was happening with it. And we're familiar with it. Changed the name to Famous Toastery. One of the first franchisees who, Stacy White, who owns our both Mooresville locations, she waited tables at Famous Toastery.
Yeah.
Right. She was a school teacher. She and her husband scraped together everything they had to make it go.
All right, y'all, check it out. Stick is our sponsor, connectwithstick.com. This is an incredible text and marketing tool. So check this out. Engage your customers, drive foot traffic, and increase sales at your bar, your restaurant, your store with Stick. Your targeted messages reach your audience instantly, promoting special offers and events. Look, 98% of texts are seen within 3 minutes. So this thing is simple and it's effective and it works. Elevate your marketing strategy and watch your customer base grow with the most direct way to connect with your customers through text. Start today and see results on the very first text. Stick is a better way to connect with your customers and the easiest way to increase your sales. www.connectwithstick.com. And again, that's www.connectwithstick.com. Folks, this is an awesome sponsor. It's an awesome business. We at ScheduleFly know them well. We know that the results are there. This is a highly effective tool, and it's run by a business run by great people. Check them out, connectwithstick.com.
So, fast forward, I mean, we're 20 years old, this year. And about 2.5 years ago, Robert decided that, he was going to expand the operation that Famous Toastery really needed to take a look at why it didn't have more than a regional following. Because if you knew Famous Toastery, you loved it.
Yeah.
So Michael Mabry is his managing director, gave me a call and said, "What's going on with you?" Emily and I were at a place where, our youngest had just finished her master's degree at SMU. She was playing soccer internationally. Our oldest was, in a relationship where she's, about to get married, and she's in the marketing world after her soccer career. They're doing great. And I'm like, "Do we have one more adventure in us? Let's go check out this Famous Toastery." And, my wife said, "What?" And I said, "Famous Toastery." She's like, "What is that? What, I don't get what that is." And I said, "Well, I'll tell you about it." So I flew to Charlotte, met with Robert and Michael in the Davidson location, and just loved it. Loved the food. Wanted to see what this was about. And I'm like, "How did you guys come up with this name, Famous Toastery?" "Well, can't trademark toast, so we worked on some things, and we just felt like we had the best product, so we went with Famous." And I'm just like, okay, it doesn't really resonate, but okay. And I went home and talked to my wife about it. She goes, "Man, I don't get that." And I was like, I get what you're saying. I get what you're saying. So I kind of turned it down. I just said, I'm not sure that that's the right move for us to move to Charlotte and, see what's going on with this little 25 restaurant brunch concept. It's half franchise, half corporate. And, how do you grow something like that? And I came back out and tried it again and just loved what they were executing. I love the fact that they were on this hospitality model that we've been trying to capture since the Harrigan's Don Pablo's days. This team service. I mean, there's something here, and I'm trying to figure out what the roadblocks are. So I did sign up. Said, I'd love to be the steward of this brand for a while and see where we can take it. So we were a year into it, and we had a group come through from a town in the Midwest, and they said, "You have the best food, you have the best service. We have a hard time with the name," and that was something we had always known. So we hired a couple of marketing groups and just kind of talked through that process. Famous Toastery, we keep it or kill it, right? And we actually had one group say, "You got to kill that name," but I go back to Boston Pizza or some of these other things. 40, 50 years ago, Starbucks was a really bad name,
Right.
right? So what was happening, we had no awareness. So Famous Toastery was Famous Toastery, famously fresh. Every server is your server. Famous Toastery saying famously fresh is like Walmart saying, "We want to be the employer of choice." You don't capture anything there. It sounds insincere because so many in the space do that. So we were like, first thing we have to do is figure out a way to get the name out. And we we took a call from a guy who represented some NASCAR drivers. And I thought, oh yeah, nothing says brunch like NASCAR, right? I couldn't make it work in my head. How's this going to work? And it was going to be the small part of whatever else we have going on as we figure out a way to get the name front and center. So at this point in time, and this is mid 2023, about a year ago, we're going, if you know Famous Toastery, if you've been in our restaurants, you get it, you understand it, and you love it. But outside of the Charlotte, you know, South Carolina and Virginia area, nobody knows who we are. They don't get what a Famous Toastery is. So we've got to figure out a way to do that. And it turns out NASCAR is a pretty good vehicle for that. The demographics are stellar for NASCAR. But at the middle of the year, I've already spent my marketing budget. And we talked to a guy about 3 different NASCAR drivers. The first one was so wicked expensive. A month of him blows our annual budget,
Okay.
right? The second guy was in there and liked us. And the third guy, Michael McDowell, was not expensive at all and was just a giant fan of the brand, had been taking his family there for years and just wanted to work with us in some capacity. He's one of those guys that he's not out to make bucks in the marketing stuff. He's out there to, you know, drive race cars. And I thought, okay, I'm not a NASCAR fan. I don't know anything about this stuff. Tell me how our brunch spot and this NASCAR guy is going to work. So we agreed to have a meeting with Michael, and I have no idea who this guy is, what he looks like, what it's all about. I just know he's won the Daytona 500, and he had just won the Brickyard last year in Indy, which, as we're recording, that race is coming up, and hopefully wins it again and gets to the playoffs. But I'm like, this guy's been in like 500 races and he's won two. Really? Wait, this is the guy we're talking to? I don't get this. So I come walking into our Davidson location, and he's sitting there on his phone trying to figure out where his kids are, and he's just a normal guy. And we sat there and talked for our 45-minute meeting turned into like 3.5 hours. And I just walked away from like, this is somebody we need to be partnering with in some capacity.
Yeah.
And I mean, in the year we've known him, he's gone from being just kind of like this professional relationship to a friend, and a friend to his team. The people he puts around him are just so culturally relevant to who we are that we couldn't have asked for a better partner. To me, the space felt funny. Well, the Charlotte Roval race was coming up. That was our first real foray into it, and we had some skeptics on the decision making team that why we've entered this NASCAR relationship with our remaining budget for the year. And we had an event with Michael at our Concord Mills location down the street from Charlotte Motor Speedway the week of the Roval. And when we got there at 8:30 in the morning, which we've been open for an hour and a half at that point, there is a line all the way around the building to get Michael to sign this stuff. And I thought, this is amazing. In fact, ran to the VP of Ops and said, we got to make more food, right? This is going to
Yeah.
go nuts. Not one of those people bought anything from us that day. They were all there to see Michael.
Wow.
So, as an unfrozen caveman ops guy like I am, this is the first time in my 40 years in the industry I started entertaining the term residual, because I don't like that. I like direct investments
Yeah.
directly, but I was like, there's something here. We did sit down. Several of the periphery staff did come in and eat, and, you know, tried some things, and they're like, "Oh, Famous Toastery, that's what this is." Well, that was kind of the start of this. So we noticed that we were starting to get some pickup just from, you know, Michael. It turns out NASCAR's got this pretty heavy female following. It's about 45%
Yeah. Yeah.
of the fans are female, and they're very loyal. And it's not what a guy like me thinks. If you think in stereotypes around what NASCAR is, you're wrong. You know, a lot of highly educated folks,
Yep.
a lot of very loyal folks, and that's exactly what you want as a brand builder. But most importantly, it's really about Michael and what his family is and who he is and how he's representing himself and his team. Things aren't. I mean, I at that Roval race, I think he finished 27th. I was exhausted rooting for a guy, you know,
Yeah.
27th place, and we just loved everything about it. So we did a few more things, and the guy that brought us, McDowell, was like, "So what are you guys, you know, working on?" He wanted to partner with us a little bit more on the NASCAR thing, and just wanted to know what we were about. And I said, "Well, we're in a position where we're figuring out what we're going to do with this name. Is it Famous Toastery? Does it need to be something else?" And we arrived at the fact that it is going to be Famous Toastery. We're going to be very proud of this brand. We're going to lean into it like other brands have leaned into some things, and because it is such a unique name, it will be memorable when we get people to understand what it is. We
Mm.
hired a local agency to move that forward. David Jewell and his team at the Jewell Agency here in Charlotte were fantastic partners through that. But as all that's coming together, we had our franchise conference and brought everybody to Charlotte, just kind of talk through, you know, some of the franchisees were like, don't get the NASCAR thing. And one of them was like, yeah, come on. I mean, you got a Charlotte based driver that's going to help the Charlotte locations, not going to help mine. And then Michael comes walking in with his Daytona 500 trophy to deliver the keynote. And he was like, "Oh, okay, I get it. That this is a national thing. So we started getting some momentum around this, and people are hearing the name Famous Toastery. Robert and I were walking around NASCAR tracks, and people are like, Famous Toastery, welcome to NASCAR. Um, Walking into some of our restaurants and seeing completely full race teams
Mm.
dining in our place. Okay, so that's direct, but it's not the residual. Where residual kicks in is the last night of the franchise conference. My wife and I are in the process of moving here. So I'm here, she's there, and 11 o'clock at night, my iPad goes that ding, like you got a new email, and I'm like, oh, I'm exhausted. Do I check that? We'll be there in the morning. And it was the guy that brought us McDowell said, "Hey, we've got a confidential thing here, but the Bahamas Bowl isn't going to happen. And they've got a decent price, but they're moving it to Charlotte, and there's a title sponsorship available for that. And would you know anybody?" And I did have an actual Dumb and Dumber moment where I thought, "Gee, some lucky guy's going to get a bowl game." Right? I thought about it for about 2 minutes, and it's 11:05. Excuse me. I called Robert immediately. I was like, "Hey, man, did you see this email that we just got?" He's like, "Who died? Why are you calling me?" I said, we're in the brunch business, man. We don't do this 11 o'clock stuff. I was like, "Check the email." And he called me back. He said, I don't really get that. What does that mean? I said, "If we do this, every degenerate gambler living in his mother's basement is going to say our name at least once this season. And this is the kind of thing where we just need to get the name out."
Yeah.
Right. Everybody on an ESPN scroll is going to see our name. We didn't know. I mean, we've only got 8 weeks to throw this thing together. But if we don't have the relationship with McDowell, I don't get that email. Right.
Yep.
So we really kind of changed the paradigm of who we were in the spaces we've been working in. And then, I get this email and we kind of kick it around. At 11:30 went to that VP of Finance and Ops house because, accountants love seeing their brand presidents, right, show up on their doorstep at 11:30 at night.
Midnight. Yeah.
He
Right.
opens the door, said, "Who died?" I said, "Hey, I think we're going to need some money. I think we're going to throw something together here." And he's like, "Yeah, you blew your budget on McDowell." And I started ripping the seat cushions off his couch and checking for change, and made a little statement. Then he saw what we were about there, and we raised it and had a decision. And I can tell you that ESPN Events, based here in Charlotte, best partner I think I've ever worked with in any capacity. They were just fantastic. All the folks that brought us this. McDowell does the coin toss, at the famous Toastery Bowl. It's the fourth biggest comeback ever. Our website crashed for the first time in history for 3 hours during the bowl game. And then ESPN does us the favor of changing networks in the middle of the game because it was running long because of this overtime thing. And people are saying Famous Toastery, Famous Toastery, Famous Toastery. And I don't think we overcame the name Famous Toastery. We're just in the process of rebranding it, and now more and more people are going. We had some folks in this past week from other parts of the country that don't know where they heard Famous Toastery. They don't know where they got that name. But they were like, "Man, this food is good. This service is excellent." Such a secret, and we're really not such an underdog anymore. I mean, guys like Robert and Brian, the founders, you go back to that. They're quintessential underdogs. Blue collar upbringing, fighters their whole lives, grinding out, absolutely earned everything that they have.
So you have what is it, 6 or 8 that are corporate?
6.
6 that are corporate, and how many franchise?
That would be 19.
19.
And then we've got another 10 in the pipeline, and
Another
more
10 in
coming.
the pipeline.
Yep.
Okay. 10 what does that mean in the pipeline, over the next 12 months or?
Over the development schedules are for the next 4 years.
Okay, 4 years.
I'd be surprised if we haven't doubled in size in the next 36 months.
Okay.
That's the current schedule we're on.
Okay. And are you primarily in the Carolinas?
Right now, primarily in the Carolinas.
Yeah.
That's the thing on franchising is that, you can't do deals where you can't support folks.
Well, that's what I was wondering about this whole franchise thing. Like, you've got your epicenter here, and then do you sort of like grow in concentric circles out, or do you? I mean, Like if you had somebody in Dallas, Texas right now that wanted to
Yep.
open a franchise,
Well,
would
it's funny you say that, but yes, right. To have someone leave their job and to do one famous toastery in Dallas, Texas, doesn't make sense for either of us.
yeah.
If someone with some experience and some infrastructure in Dallas, Texas, that wants to grow a market, that type of decision would make sense
Okay.
for us. But a series of one-offs somewhere where, unless they've got a lot of restaurant experience and some brand building experience, because first time you go in, you, say we went to Ottumwa, Iowa, where I'm from, and put a place called Famous Toastery there. No one's going to know what that is, and it takes some
Mm.
some real stewardship to make that happen.
Do you look at the demographics of where where NASCAR is most popular
Yeah,
and
we
try to
do.
overlay that a little bit, or
We have. One thing we thought was going to happen from the bowl game is we thought we were going to get Norfolk, Virginia, where Old Dominion's from, and we were going to get somebody from Bowling Green, Kentucky, where Western Kentucky was,
yeah,
right, just to call us up. And that didn't happen.
yeah,
But an awful lot of people there have, in both locations, have some great vibes on our concept. So when you look at that, we are in. I mean, Charlotte is the hub of NASCAR country for a reason, and it's silly not to look at what those concentric rings look like, right?
yeah.
We've got an awful lot of interest right now in exactly those areas. But Robert was just up at the Poconos for the race. McDowell finished second in Sonoma, California, earlier this year. So
Mm,
it's been the right partner for us because it is national. Right. I
mm,
mean, there was a race in Iowa this year. That was the first NASCAR race in Iowa. They had a Cup Series race there. I'm not saying I got to be in Des Moines in a couple of weeks,
yeah,
right? But we're getting that type of outreach. But the traditional Southeast, probably a better way of saying it's the SEC markets,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Yeah, I think we're strong there. We're branded for that, and the offering has certainly got that Carolina SEC flavor to it.
How do you find franchisees? Do you actively recruit, or do they contact you, or both?
Yeah, it's an awareness campaign, really, is what it's about. We're not here to sell franchises or sell restaurants to people. I mean, that's just a road to nowhere. A franchise relationship in its purest form should be a partnership.
Yeah,
And we're just looking for the right partners for people. Now, some of the one-offs that we've done, I mentioned Stacy's, she's a school teacher who's become a heck of a restaurateur. We have a former VP of sales for Carrier Air Conditioning that has a great restaurant up in Virginia. We have a nuclear pharmacist in Roanoke, Virginia, right? So it can work. For the term is corporate refugees, but when they come in for a discovery process, that's where we're getting to understand them and they're getting to understand us. And this year was the year we got to say no to some people. Like, hey, we don't really think this is for you. So
mm,
it's about partnership. We'll talk to anybody that's interested and wants to know about us. Just to be respectful, we are in the hospitality industry, and
yeah, sure.
that's the culture. But it's not for everybody to come in. Just because you like to eat doesn't mean you're a good restaurateur. I got 40 years to tell you I like to eat, and it took me a while to become a good restaurateur.
Yeah, right.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a lot of those folks that are sort of like, I'm tired of the corporate
Yeah.
thing and I want to get into something and I don't necessarily want to. I'm far enough along. I can't take the risk of building my own concept, but I can take somebody else's playbook and try to execute. But it's a probably a bigger transition than a lot of people in corporate America think to get in.
It is.
You can have a great brand and a great playbook and a great team behind that brand, but man, it's a
Well,
different way of.
I'm glad you brought it up because it's a big. I was a franchisee of a concept for a little bit, and the biggest transition you make from a W-2 employee to quarterly taxes, right,
Right.
is that you get the last paycheck,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think folks understand that,
Yeah.
right, when they come in or they're looking for the decision maker and realizing for the first time in their life they are the decision maker,
Yeah.
and that there is an order of operations and things that have to happen, and sometimes it really works good. Sometimes it doesn't, but both are going to happen.
And the number of decisions that you tend to have to make on a daily basis in this business can probably be overwhelming to some if they're not used to or be able to adapt to make those kinds of decisions because you're dealing with essentially, when you're dealing with every aspect of the economy flows through a restaurant,
Hmm.
and you're dealing with everything from a major piece of equipment breaking down to a cook quitting mid shift to a customer, irate customer, to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, to the roof floods. I mean, it is just unbelievable the number of things literal or metaphorical fires that you may have to put out in any given day. So I don't think most consumers really understand what it takes.
Yep.
I believe, through having done so many of these episodes over so many years and used to think that I wanted a restaurant, and now have zero interest in that myself
Oh,
because
come on now.
I don't have that skill set. So I admire it a lot.
Yep.
I've grown to have a tremendous amount of respect for people that are able to, day in and day out, make these decisions, build a team of people that they can trust, and just all of the ebbs and flows of every single day in a restaurant, to me, it's got to be massively rewarding when you get it right.
Oh
But then
man.
you got to get up the next day and, like, who cares what happened yesterday? We got to knock it out of the park again today. And that's a
Athletes
real,
call it being in the zone, but
yeah,
there's nothing. I mean, I'm telling you, nothing on this earth more intoxicating than a well-run shift if that you're in charge of.
yeah,
I'm telling you, it's
it's
that's how it
awesome.
gets in your blood, right? When
Yeah,
people are digging what you're doing and you can make a living at it,
yeah,
that is why we do it,
yeah,
right?
yep,
We're all, I mean, those of us who are good at it tend to be pleasers by nature.
yeah,
You know, I'll tell you that.
sure, sure. Yeah, and if you're not, I mean, this stuff will weed you out pretty fast.
Yep.
So, okay, so you've got these 25, you're in this space. It's an interesting space. You've got First Watch, you've got Eggs Up Grill down
Yep.
here out of Spartanburg, and then you've got, like I just meant, you've got Biscuit Belly and Vicious Biscuit, not direct, but all in this sort of like breakfast, lunch kind of
Yeah.
space. So there's a lot of
There's a lot going on
competition,
there,
a
right?
lot going on right now.
You bet. The First Watch was one that Emily and I, when we moved to Cincinnati in the mid '90s, we were in First Watch every week. Our
Yeah.
kids
Is
grew
that
up
where
there,
that
so
started?
I don't know exactly where they started, but I know they had a stronghold there, and it was 10 miles to get to it, which isn't convenient for anybody, even on a Sunday. And that was our weekend spot. What the original First Watches were, and they've done a wonderful job scaling and growing the brand. Um, what happens, I think, in the brunch space is the same thing that happens in any other restaurant. The fundamentals are true. Is
Yeah.
that we're 20. First Watch is probably about that old, maybe a little older. No, they've got to be pushing 35, 40. But you go through years of creep on your menu. You've got all these LTOs and stuff like that that you grow, and then they find a place on the menu, and then you get to a place where you can no longer execute it,
Hmm.
right? And in famous Toastery, we just went through a contraction, which is a modest contraction, but we just kind of got the stuff off that we didn't feel like we were best in the world at, that didn't really necessarily drive the economic engine of the business, and stuff we just weren't passionate about. Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
looking at you, liver mush, right? I mean, just stuff like that that was not working for us. Um, and because of that, there's got to be a system. What you were just describing is kind of mundane of the day to day. Well, we tend to do that as brand leaders or brand owners. Is that we don't have a check and balance for the offering, right? What is it we're continually doing? Somebody's spaghetti and meatballs could be the mainstay on their menu for years and years and years, and you have to augment that to drive trial, to drive frequency and all that stuff, but you can't just continue to add to the menu.
Yeah.
Next thing you know, you've got all these SKUs. So from time to time, and we do it annually, we just look at what it is we're selling, and you got to earn your real estate on the menu,
Hmm.
right? um I lost my train of thought on that after that. Oh gosh.
Well, that actually brings up something I'm fascinated with, is getting the is menu management and
Yep.
doing a few things really, really well. And because most people, when they go into I mean, I definitely do this when I go to a place and there's bunches of pages and lots of stuff.
Hmm.
Your initial thought is, okay, they can't do anything really well, if there's so many items on there.
Yeah. What's the guest here to do?
But
What's going to bring him
what
back, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, and I don't even I think because when I ate with you, I think they made this for me, but it wasn't even on your menu anymore.
Oh, the Greek omelet.
Yeah. I mean, I ate the Greek I told you my mom and I went to your Valentine location for years every Tuesday, and I mean, I got the exact same thing every single time. Didn't need to think about it, loved it
Hmm.
so good. So good.
Yeah,
Uh,
I've been kicking myself on that one. That was one of those tweeners, right? That was right there at the cusp. So yeah, we did kill it, but we can still do it,
yeah.
right? And then you came in. You were the first guy since we did that last year that said, "Man, where's the Greek omelet?"
Well, that was all I knew. I mean, it
Yeah,
was like I had maybe like the first time I had it, however many times it took me to get to it, and I was like Greek omelet with chicken and the potatoes and like every single time, and an English muffin. That was like my
there you
jam.
go. Yeah,
That
that
was my
sounds
jam.
good. I'm getting hungry.
Yeah. Well, you I mean, you all have look as as a customer. I mean, I certainly the reason we went there,
Hmm.
Mom and I did every Tuesday for years was y'all just got it right
Mm,
consistently. Just the service model, the friendliness of the staff, how quick the food came out, how hot and well done it was. I mean, it's
yeah,
just so, and that's what I'm assuming you're often hoping for is you want those regular customers who just go, I can count on them. Like
hmm,
I know what I'm going to get. I don't need to think about like that's the other thing. Like, eliminating we make decisions all the time. So like for us, that was a big thing to be like, okay, we don't even have to think about like we had tried a few different places. Ah, there we go. Got
yeah.
it. Like
Your place.
boom, this is our place.
That's what
Yeah.
we endeavor to be. Is your place.
Yeah.
The thing about
That's
being your place is it's our responsibility to repeatedly earn that, which
yeah.
means, yeah, I think the number one failure in this business for sure is folks that do not have the ability to render humble service.
Mm-hmm.
It's a humbling endeavor. I mean, period. And you have to do it humbly, and you have to approach it from the standpoint is it ain't about you. It's
Right.
about how they feel.
Yes.
Did we deliver it? And scaling that, um, tough,
Yeah.
right? Because it
Yeah.
means different things to different people, and that's my job is making sure it's really clear what it is we're here to do and why we exist, whether you're a franchise or company location.
Well, last thing I'll say is you've talked about your brand.
Hmm.
I think I love your brand. I
Well,
mean,
thank you.
when
You
it
got to
was
earn that.
toast, it's great. Famous Toastery. Okay. Get it. They probably can't use toast and grow anywhere outside of this, whatever. It was like,
Yeah,
can't trademark it. I mean, look, I don't really know what first watch means, and they've done pretty darn well with
exactly.
that.
Well,
It
the
just
first watch is the morning. I get that.
see,
Famous toastery could be a lot of things, but we're going to know it a lot better in the future.
I feel like Famous Toasteries. It says a lot to
Hmm.
me. I really it does. Like First Watch, I didn't know what that was. I just was heard about there like some place called First Watch, and I went.
Yeah,
I was like, oh, okay, I guess it's breakfast. But first, I don't know.
cool.
You guys are doing the right things of getting the fundamentals right. That brand, you could
Thank
call
you.
it whatever you want to call it. It's people are going to flock to it. I think so.
We're excited to know us is to love us. We've learned that.
Yeah.
And it's the same experience I had. Funny name. Now we got to make sure it's not such a funny name because when you try us, you tend to really like us.
Well,
And there's some responsibility to keep that up, right?
a lot of I don't know how many Boston peaches pieces there wound up being up there in Canada, but there's a hell of a lot of them. I know that. So they
They're an
figured that out
interesting
too.
story, those guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
Love it.
Mike, this is awesome. Thank you for taking the time to come in here and do this. Thanks for doing what you're doing. Thanks for sharing a lot of advice and wisdom and knowledge. And anybody listening to this is going to learn a lot. And I hope that this also, gets out to a lot of ears and helps spread Famous Toastery brand to more people.
Well, thanks, man. Always a pleasure to spend time with you. Thanks, man.
Absolutely. That's a wrap, y'all. Thank you.
Cheers.